Welcome back everyone. Hi, if you're new, I'm Tori, and today we're going to get into all of my thoughts, spoiler-free thoughts on some of the 2025 releases that I've read so far this year. I have 9, so there is a lot that I want to go through, and I'm going to try to keep it as short as possible just because I don't want it to be a long video, but also I'm keeping it short just to, use this as my way to ease back into making content. I know it's been a while. Thank you guys for still being here. Thank you for your patience, and I hope we have a really good fall and just end the year strong. That's my hope, my intention, and just really appreciate you guys still, having enthusiasm and still being here. But yeah, let me know what 2025 releases you guys have been reading this year, what you've been loving, not really loving so much, and I hope you enjoy this video. Let's get back into it. So first I was thinking I would go through the video, doing my least favorite 2025 release up to the one that I've loved the most so far this year. But now I'm thinking I'm just gonna go in the order that I read these in. So let's first start off with The Devils by Joe Abercrombie. This is a book, I think it came out like in April, but I was one of those people who got a freakishly early copy of this book. So I actually read this book in like September, October last year. So it's been sitting with me for a really long time. I didn't do a standalone review video for The Devils, but I did put it in like one of my wrap-up videos, I think towards the end of last year, and talked about it maybe a little bit at the beginning of this year. And honestly, my thoughts on this book haven't changed. I don't see myself continuing on with this series. This was just way too funny for me, and it's just the type of humor that I wasn't resonating with. It's just very, I don't know, like lowbrow kind of body type of humor. It's like the same joke all the time, just said different ways. Also, I think the structure of the story just got a bit too repetitive for me after a while. We have a pretty large cast in this book, but one of our main characters is this young woman she has to be transported to a particular destination for an important reason, and we have this large cast surrounding her that are trying to get her there, and they're experienced in fighting in different ways. They're experienced in different like magical arts. So it's a really interesting cast. I think the distinctions between all the characters and their chapters were all incredibly strong, but just overall, the structure, the tone, the humor just didn't work for me. So I am going to be DNFing this series, but I'm of course not done with Joe Abercrombie. There's still so much in the First Law universe that I want to read. So I will be getting to that hopefully in 2026. But just in terms of this new trilogy that he has going, I think I'm going to call it quits on it. So now let's get into what I officially started 2025 with. One of the first books I read this year was Lightfall by Ed Crocker. This is not only just one of my least favorite 2025 releases, just overall it is one of the worst books that I've read so far in 2025. I'm not going to be continuing on with this series, and you are going to see this book one more time. It's going to be somewhere like in my worst books, disappointing books, end of year video that I typically do. I think the marketing for this book has been doing it a real disservice from the beginning. It's said to be great for fans of Empire of the Vampire and Justice of Kings, and we're getting that Justice of Kings comparison because there is a big mystery at the heart of the story, but the mystery is nowhere near as intriguing as it is in Justice of Kings. I don't think it's well fleshed out like it was in Justice of Kings. The characters are not on the same level as those in the Empire of the Wolf trilogy. So if the book does sound interesting, I would say just keep those comparisons out of your mind and just try to experience this book for what it is. And that's ultimately what I end up doing and what I strive to do, even when there are comparisons to books that I'm going into. But it just didn't deliver. It didn't deliver on the mystery that it set up, didn't deliver on the characters. I thought there were far too many points of views in the story, and they're all in first person, which was, for me, that was just not a great idea. I think after a while you just couldn't distinguish between the characters. They all sound the same. I found a lot of the naming conventions just for like the classes of vampires and just different parts of the world. I thought the names were a little silly. I don't know. I just thought I was going to get a lot more from this book than what I did. Not to mention, it's just kind of boring. I'm going to leave it at that. But if it does sound interesting to you, this is a society where there's all these different creatures, but kind of the main supernatural creature are vampires. But we have a world with vampires, other creatures, and there are classes of different vampires. And one of our main characters that we're following, she is of the lower class, well, not lower, she's the lowest class of vampire. And she stumbles upon something at the beginning of the book that she thinks she can try to use as blackmail to put herself in a different class of vampires. and what she finds has to do with the ruling vampire's son being murdered. And so the story just kind of spirals from there. We're getting a lot of fantasy politics from the different creatures that inhabit this world. Actual setup for it is really intriguing. There are no humans in this world. So I think there is just a lot of different missed opportunities in this novel. So not for me, didn't have a good time with it. I think the mystery just started falling apart for me. Don't think the characters were very strong, and I definitely will not be moving on with this series. Speaking of Justice of Kings and Richard Swan, let's talk about Grave Empire. This is one I did get to talk about a little bit before I took that big hiatus, but Grave Empire is one that I really enjoyed. At this point, I love Richard Swan's work. This is the first book in his, I hesitate to really call it like a continuation series or a sequel series to Empire of the Wolf. That to me implies that you need to read the works that came before. And in this case, I don't think you need to read the Empire of the Wolf trilogy. I'm always going to recommend that you do, just because that is such a phenomenal fantasy series. I loved every single book, raved about every single book. I think each one of them made my best books of the year lists in the years that they came out. Justice of Kings, Tyranny of Faith, Trials of Empire are just phenomenal. But when it comes to Grave Empire, this takes place hundreds of years after the events of the final book in the original trilogy. And if you just go into this and you pick it up, you're gonna understand what's happening. The story stands on its own. Again, this is brand new trilogy, brand new problem, new characters, all of that. But one thing that I think I did mention when I spoke about this book before is I think you'll get a lot of context into this world, into the beliefs of these characters, the thinking, the philosophies, all of that, if you have read Empire of the Wolf trilogy, because a lot of things that happen in that book dealing with dark magic and religion and, you know, the law, all of that, it has shaped this new world that we're in hundreds of years later and the beliefs that these characters hold. So I think that's really important to have context for. But just as a story, I think this stands alone perfectly fine and you can read it. I didn't love it as much as book one in the Empire of the Wolf trilogy. Richard Swan, he's been getting so much more into fantasy horror, especially we saw it in the last two books in the original trilogy. The third book in particular was just an all-out horror novel, and that continues on in this new trilogy that he started. A lot of horror elements. It's incredibly atmospheric. I do think though we spent a lot of time really kind of hammering home, like, this is creepy. The characters feel a little out of sorts, a little bit paranoid. So there's a lot of that happening, and I think it just constantly happens to the point where I'm like, I get it. The world is creepy. Like, let's move on. But I think there's just a lot of heavy lifting that needed to be done to establish how dark and how creepy this world has become. So I can understand it both ways, but I think that in particular is just a minor thing that kept me from being like, oh my God, this is just so incredible. I loved it so much. I loved our two new main characters, Renata, Peter. We also have another character we're following. I thought they were great. We have a really epic problem happening that's called the Great Silence that they're trying to tackle. And overall, I just really love the journey of this story, and I can't wait to see where it's gonna go in the sequel. We'll be reading more from Richard Swan going forward. He's just been a great new voice in the fantasy genre for the last few years or so. Next, let's talk about Death of the Author by Nnedi Okorafor. This was another great read. I think in the grand scheme of things that I've read from Nnedi Okorafor, I wouldn't call this a favorite, but Nnedi Okorafor, she just doesn't write a bad book in my opinion, so I still really ended up enjoying this. I've talked about this one a little bit too earlier in the year, and I think this one, from what I've read from her, just feels like the most kind of raw and cathartic reading experience. So I can't even imagine what she felt like writing this. There are just so many incredible themes that she's exploring in this that have to do with, you know, the artist putting your work out there, being perceived, being criticized. Is it even yours once it's out and people have their own opinions of it? So there's a lot of that is being explored in this book, on top of our main character being disabled and grappling with her Nigerian American identity. The book starts with our main character being fired from her adjunct professor, creative writing job, and following that, she's just in this state of frustration, not knowing what to do, and just overall not feeling great about her writing career thus far. And so she sits down to write something that is only for her, just putting her whole self into it and telling the story to the best of her ability. And this story becomes Rusted Robots. And this is a book that eventually does get published. and just catapults her into literary stardom. Like everybody in the world quite literally knows what Rusted Robots is. They're reading it, they love it, have an opinion about it. So we're getting our main character story as she is on that upward trajectory of her literary career, and also being criticized, getting feedback from everybody about Rusted Robots and how they perceive the story, along with her also having to, deal with some complicated things going on in her family. But we're also getting the story of Rusted Robots, and there is like a big end of the world robot situation happening in that other narrative. So yeah, I thought this was great, really enjoyed it. I love the ending, love how everything just kind of came together and put a new perspective on a lot of things that you had read. But yeah, this was another great read from Nnedi Okorafor. She's an auto-buy author for me, and I can't wait to see what she does next. One of the other new releases I read this year was The Raven Scholar by Antonia Hodgson. This was so fun. I think there was so much deep history with the world that we were just kind of scratching the surface of in this first book, so I can't wait to see how much more of it we get in the sequel. This was just good. It was a good time. It was a fun time. It's a world where animals are kind of like the heads of different regions and different groups, and so characters can be part of different animal. I'm not even explaining this properly. The characters can be like members of different animal groups. So you have like ravens and bears, tigers, foxes, all of that. And they kind of represent different parts of society, different parts of the history of this world. But every couple of decades, whoever the ruler is at the time, the emperor, they will host this competition, pulling representatives from these different groups to compete against each other in different battles of wit or strength, that sort of thing, to determine who is going to be the next emperor of this land. And our main character, Nima Cross, she has no intention of being the emperor taking place in this competition, but one of the competitors is murdered before things can even really get going. And so Nima, she is brought in to investigate what happened and why, and in the process of this, she gets sucked into this competition. And throughout the novel, we're also learning just so much about the world and the politics, the different relationships that the animal groups have with each other. It's just really fascinating. It's really fascinating, but also I think what I really love most about it is the way that it's told. Nima is our main character, but I'm not going to spoil it. It's kind of a spoiler, the way that the story is actually being told. So it's not really being told through like Nima's perspective or the other characters' perspectives. You just have to experience it for yourself. I think it's just a fun little spin on a typical narrative, and I think it worked out really well. So I can't wait to see where this story goes in the sequel. I'll definitely be reading it. Next, let's get into a big one, and that would be Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil by V.E. Schwab. I don't really know where to start with Bury Our Bones. V.E. Schwab, let me think about this. V.E. Schwab is a very hit or miss author for me. I've read several V.E. Schwab books, including the Shades of Magic trilogy. I've read Vicious, Addie LaRue, now this. I DNF'd the Shades of Magic sequel book. I forgot what it's called. Fragile Threads of Power. DNF'd that just because I wasn't too interested. I also DNF'd Gallant. So I've got a few V.E. Schwab books under my belt at this point. And of the books that I've read from her, I really only loved two, and that would be Vicious and Addie LaRue. Bury Our Bones, I really wasn't moved by it in any particular direction. I didn't love it. I didn't think it was terrible. It was just a book I finished and I was like, okay. One of my biggest issues with this book that I think definitely impacted the rest of my reading experience was the writing. There is something about V.E. Schwab's more like literary prose that just does not like resonate with me, doesn't work for me very well. And granted, I just said that I love Addie LaRue, and this is a writing style that we do see in Addie LaRue, but as far as I know, I think that was actually the first time we've really seen that kind of style from V.E. Schwab when it came to Addie LaRue. And so because of that, it was new, it was just fresh and exciting, but also it was nowhere near as strong in Addie LaRue as it is in this new release. I find it very hard to put into words, but there is something about the cadence of her writing style, just the repetition of it, how overly descriptive and flowy it is. There's something about it that I find to be a little tiresome after a while. And I could honestly tell maybe about a third of the way through, I was like, I don't think this is going to work for me as well as I wanted to. So just because of that and my feelings on the writing, it just really impacted the rest of the story. So I wasn't getting as attached to the characters as I would have liked. I think there's a big chunk of this book that is quite boring. I do think the way that V.E. Schwab is exploring the themes that are in this book, I think the way she's handling those did really work for me, and I actually loved those elements. We're following 3 different characters. One of them I'm not even going to touch on because she's technically in the description, but we don't get her like full-blown perspective until more than halfway through the book, so we'll leave her POV alone. But we have 2 characters. One of them is Alice, and she, I would say, is more like in our present day story of 2019. And we have who I would consider is like kind of our main thread throughout the entire story, which is Maria. And her story starts in like the kind of early to mid 16th century. And this is a woman who just immediately you can tell she wants so much more for her life. She doesn't fit in with the conventions of the time, especially as it concerns what women should and shouldn't be doing. And so we're seeing how a lot of that unfolds over the course of her perspective, how she's being mistreated and abused. There's so much of that trauma that's just piling up on this character that it just reaches a boiling point. And we start to get into the vampire-ness of it all, if you will. So I do think there is something really fascinating being done with how Schwab introduces us to this character, introduces her trauma and how she wants so much more for herself. But we now see how this character is in some ways repeating this cycle of, I would hesitate to say cycle of abuse because, well, we'll just go with that for the time being. But how she's repeating these things that have been done to her, because now she's in a position where she can take matters into her own hands and she can be strong and stand up for herself. And there's something about that I think is really incredible. I just don't think the actual way that it's told, the cadence of it and the writing of it, there's something about it that just kind of takes me out of it. Again, V.E. Schwab, I've seen enough of V.E. Schwab's like interviews and enough of her videos. I like her as a person, like truly. I just still think a lot of her work for me is just kind of hit or miss. But because of that, I am going to continue to pick up her books that sound interesting to me, just because you never know what's going to work for you. But I think she's a really talented author, so creative. I like her ideas and concepts, but some of them are not always going to land, and that's totally okay. Next, let's get into A Song of Legends Lost by M.H. Allende. This is the first book in the start to a brand new trilogy that's called the Invoker Trilogy. To be a debut, I thought this was amazing. This is a very large cast of characters. It's kind of deceptively large because the description on the back, I think there's only one character mentioned, our main character Timmy, but when you start reading it, it really begins to branch out. And that's one of the, I think, strongest elements of this book. You know, we've all read those fantasy books where it's multi-POV, and when you flip to the next perspective, it's just somebody that you do not want to see, that you don't care about, that you find to be so boring. I think it's really impressive how Allende is able to juggle all of these different perspectives and make them all interesting. There was never a point in this story where I flipped to a new chapter, saw who it was, and just kind of like rolled my eyes. I was always invested, always interested, and I think that is a real talent, especially for a debut author. This is a world where we have people that have been fighting against this common enemy known as the Greybloods for centuries at this point. And this land has all of these different clans, and some of the clans can actually be like noble clans, low blood clans. And those who are in the like noble clans are able to summon their ancestor in battle. And I just thought that was incredible. I love the way that Allende handles ancestral magic and what that looks like. The ancestors can be summoned through dance and movement. And the first time I saw it unfold, it just gave me chills. I loved it. I loved it. I thought this was great. There is also obviously this big epic story going on in the background, this big threat that's happening. One of our main characters who I did mention is on the back, Temmie. She is actually of a low blood clan, and typically low bloods are not able to summon their ancestors. They don't have that ability, but something happens in the beginning of the book where Temmie does summon this spirit, and from there, it just becomes this question of, you know, how did this happen? Who is the spirit? Like, why was she able to do something like this? So we have that going on, but also Allende is blending some like sci-fi themes in here as well. There's some really cool technology that we get in this book. So this was just great. I loved it. I cannot wait to not only read the sequel, but I can't wait to see what else Allende is gonna do in the sci-fi fantasy space. I think it's incredible. I think she's a breath of fresh air, and I just cannot wait to see more. This was amazing. Next, we're gonna quickly talk about Cold Eternity by S.A. Barnes. This was interesting. I think S.A. Barnes only has 3 novels, and so I've read all 3 of them. Dead Silence, Ghost Station, and now this one, Cold Eternity. I liked this more than Ghost Station, less than Dead Silence, but I think the story of Cold Eternity is stronger than both of them. So do with that information what you will. You know, S.A. Barnes, she has definitely nailed that creepy, just atmosphere, eerie tension throughout her stories. But what I'm finding, and I think it became a little bit more noticeable to me in Ghost Station, is that I think there is just not the strongest balance between all of that creepiness and that atmosphere and the actual story that's being told and the characters and their backstories and all of that. Our main character in this is Haley. We find out that she was involved in this political scandal that happened, and so she's been trying to lay low, just get off the radar. And she has this opportunity to like ship sit, if you will. There's this big like generation ship that houses people in cryo sleep from Earth, and these are like wealthy people, famous people, and they've all been in cryo sleep for a very long time. The ship in and of itself though is kind of abandoned, and so Haley gets an opportunity to go to that ship, just kind of keep an eye on things, make sure nothing weird is going on, keep an eye on people in cryo sleep, and she just thinks that's a great place to just get off the radar until things die down. But of course, eerie stuff is happening in the ship. There's a larger backstory that's also moving things forward as well. So it's a lot of that going on. But overall, I really liked the setting of this, and I liked Haley more than our other previous main characters. But when this reached the middle, I was like, where's this going? It's entertaining, but it just kind of loses me a little bit. I think if you have already read something from S.A. Barnes and you just want to keep reading more from her, you like the way that she handles atmosphere and all of that, you know, go pick up Cold Eternity. That's where we are. Cold Eternity is a fun time, just not like a great one. Now, Dead Silence, unpopular opinion, that was a fun and great time, but again, do with that information what you will. Last but certainly not least, you guys, let's talk about The Strength of the Few by James Islington. This is no exaggeration to say this was not just one of my anticipated releases of 2025. This was the anticipated release for me for 2025. There is one more that I would put up there that we're going to talk about in another video, but Strength of the Few, I have been yapping and raving about The Will of the Many since I read it, and this sequel has just been at the top of my anticipated list for so long. So first, I just got to give a big thank you to Saga Press for an early copy of this book. I really appreciate it, and I'm also happy to say, you guys, that this is a really strong sequel. This is an ambitious sequel. There are some things that I am going to get into, especially in I'm going to do like a full-blown spoiler-free review of this book in just a separate video. But in terms of just like, is this a good book? Is this worth the wait? Am I going to be disappointed if I love The Will of the Many? Yes, it's worth the wait. No, you will not be disappointed. I also just recently finished the Lycanius trilogy. And so now that, you know, I've wrapped up that trilogy and I've read Strength of the Few, I feel like I can say this confidently. James Islington's concepts, his ideas, his structures are just on a different, like just a different level. It's so much going on, but I think the way that it unfolds, the way that he handles it and plots out his stories, it is so impressive. It's so well done, and The Strength of the Few, I think, is the strongest testament to that. If you've read The Will of the Many, you know exactly how that book ends in the epilogue, how explosive that epilogue was. And Strength of the Few starts immediately after that last scene. Like page 1 of Strength of the Few would literally be what the next scene would have been. Did that make sense? Anyways, it's like literally the next scene. So it starts immediately. We just kind of get thrown right into things, and from there it just takes off. The world expands so much in this. There is a massive cast of characters, a massive cast of new characters, I'll say, that we get in this book, and just so much great things are happening in this story. A lot of the questions, exciting questions I had about Will at the end of the first book, we get a lot more of that answered in The Strength of the Few. Just the limitations of Will, what it can really do, how it can be used in different situations. Oh my gosh, it's so much of that happening in this book. This one is also getting a lot deeper into politics. You know, from The Will of the Many, the position that this left off in, just in terms of his school and, you know, the society and all of that. So he's in a different position now in this book, and you really get to see those politics at play with some really important, powerful figures. So I love that aspect of the book. But one of my favorite elements of this book is how much this world expands, how much of the different cultures that we're getting in this book. It's just really incredible when you take all of that into account and how some of those different plot threads and storylines are balanced. There's so many plot threads. There's just so much happening in this book. So like overall, I had an amazing time reading this. Some of my nitpicky things about this book that I do want to help set expectations for is I do think this book takes a really big hit in terms of pacing, maybe about midway through. Once you're comfortable with the large cast of characters and the expansion and more of the history and stuff that we're getting, once that all starts to kind of settle a little bit, there is a bit of a lull that happens in this book. So definitely be aware of that. This one is also a bit longer than The Will of the Many. And also one of my other things that I wasn't the biggest fan of in this book, but I can't wait to see how it grows as the series continues. We still have 2 more books left. So definitely in the 3rd book, I hope to see this get a little bit stronger are the side characters. Like I mentioned, the cast of characters just explodes in this book. We're dealing with so many characters doing so many different things, so many different motivations. They're working with this in all these complicated different ways. So there's a lot plot-wise that's happening with these characters. But I think because of that and just because of the length of this book, I was expecting to be a little bit more invested in the side characters and expected them to have a little bit more depth than they did over the course of this book. I think for most readers, that's not going to be a large issue, but just something that stuck out to me over the course of the book. I mean, overall, this is a fantastic sequel. This is one that I would definitely put up there with like some of my all-time favorite sequels. Like, I always have to mention it, like Jade War and Golden Sun, Wall of Storms now, like Tyranny of Faith. So just so many great sequels that I would put this book up there with. I think this is well worth the wait, you guys. So much to look forward to. This is out on November 11th. Mark your calendars. And if you love The Will of the Many, if you loved that explosive ending, you're gonna have just a really, really wild time with The Strength of the Few. So I cannot wait for this to also be in your hands come November. So that is it for me, you guys. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. Like I mentioned in the intro, let me know your thoughts on some of the 2025 releases that you've read this year. What have you been loving? What haven't you been loving? Are you excited for any of these that I've mentioned? Or if you've read any of these, let me know. Thank you guys so much again, and I will see you in the next video. But until then, take care.